What if I told you that today's tourist with a $1,000 membrane jacket is less protected from the elements than an 18th century nomad? The endless autumn on the Great Plains could turn the world into a cold water trap capable of destroying an unprepared camp in a matter of days. We tend to think of rain as an annoying nuisance, but for the indigenous peoples of America, prolonged downpours were a deadly ordeal that required a flawless survival system. While we get soaked to the skin in an hour's walk, they lived in streams of water for weeks, keeping warm, dry clothes and a hot hearth. Watch this video to the end, and you'll learn about the ingenious engineering solution that allowed water to flow upward rather than downward in their dwellings, leaving their sleeping areas completely dry. Are you ready to learn the truth about why our struggle with nature is doomed to failure? For modern people, prolonged rain is a disaster, a reason to cancel plans and hide in the concrete box of an apartment. The indigenous peoples of the plains perceived water from the sky quite differently, not as an enemy, but as an inevitable part of the life cycle to which one simply had to adapt. They did not waste precious energy on irritation or attempts to wait out the bad weather, sitting idly. Their preparation began not with sewing clothes, but with the right attitude and the ability to read the subtle signs of approaching bad weather. Observation was their first and most important tool for protection against wetness and cold. Experienced trackers noticed changes in the wind long before the first clouds appeared on the horizon. They saw how the flight of birds changed, how the leaves of certain plants curled, and how the smell of the air changed. This gave them a head start of several hours or even days to prepare the camp for the onslaught of the elements. Suddenness was the lot of fools, and wisdom lay in foreseeing events. When the rainy season began, life in the camp did not stop, but shifted into a special wet mode. People slowed down, paying more attention to the details of everyday life, on which the health of the entire tribe now depended. Everyone knew their responsibilities. Some were busy strengthening their dwellings, some were gathering dry firewood, and some were checking food supplies. There was no panic, only coordinated work, honed by generations of ancestors. In this system, rain was not a reason for despondency or inaction. It was a time to repair equipment, make tools, and pass on knowledge to the young around a warm hearth. They understood that water nourished the earth and accepted this period with respect and calm. Psychological stability was the foundation on which the entire system of physical survival was built. The absence of fear of the elements allowed them to act rationally and clearly, without unnecessary fuss. They knew that any rain would end sooner or later, and the main task was to conserve strength until that moment. The ability to wait and endure discomfort was an important trait of the plains dwellers. Comfort was not the goal. The goal was efficiency and maintaining working capacity. It is important to understand that their dryness differed from our understanding of absolute comfort. They allowed a certain level of humidity, but never allowed it to become critical for the body. It was the art of balancing on the edge, where one wrong decision could lead to illness. It was this approach that allowed them to win the long game of survival. Their philosophy taught that it is useless to fight the rain. You need to become part of the landscape through which the water flows. They did not build dams to stop the flow, they directed it as they needed. Flexibility of thinking proved to be more important than the thickest walls and roofs. Nature was their teacher, not their opponent in the ring. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. How do you usually react to prolonged rain? Do you get depressed or find romance in it? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about why the word camp meant calmness, calculation, and a subtle reading of the land beneath their feet to the Plains Indians? Choosing a campsite was a task that required the eyes of an experienced person and a long season of observing the soil, wind, and slope. For them, a tent was not just a shelter from the wind, it was a tool that was at one with the land. They noticed every lowland and every hill as if they could see in advance the path of water, air, and the future tasks of the camp. If a problem can be spotted in advance, then it can be kept out of people's homes and recreation areas. While most travelers look for flat ground or a beautiful horizon, the medieval craftsmen of the past world did not like emptiness. The Indians of the plains also lived in the harsh combination of wind, rain, and soil, but their strategy was different. The place is your first wall against chaos. Water is your silent test of soil suitability. Therefore, noble camps were always set above lowlands and rivers, which could be beautiful but dangerous as breeding grounds for moisture. Their knowledge of the landscape was part of their internal survival budget. Campsites during the rainy season were chosen so that the sun would help dry the ground during the day, and the wind would dry it at night. They understood that moisture should not stagnate, otherwise the camp would become a liability rather than an asset. Therefore, they looked at the structure of the soil: dense soil, sandy areas, stony ground, or areas with grass that intercepts moisture without rotting. For them, grass was not a hindrance. Grass was an ally of drainage inertia. They checked this only by opening the door of the camping program up the calculated trajectory of the camp's development. Clay was almost always avoided. It swelled quickly, lost its ability to absorb rain, and immediately became a sticky trap for the logistics of moving people and objects. Where clay prevails, people move slower than they should. Sand and stone did not interfere. They absorbed rain, released air, and allowed the foundation to retain its purpose. The architect of the past knew how to see the flow of light and wind, while the Native American of the past saw the flow of water and the future value of a place to settle. They often checked the place not for a single day, but for an entire season, because the season did not forgive mistakes there. Over the years, practice had shown that the steeper the slope and the denser the wind rose, the less chaos there would be when replanting the tribe's visiting season. They dried herbs and materials on the south wall of the house and caught the initial amount of solar heat on the south side of the camp. Shallow channels were dug around the perimeter of each dwelling to drain water. These channels started from the roofline, where rainwater began to flow, and carried the streams away to where the soil did not resist, but absorbed and accepted them. These were simple, unspoken gutters of their equal engineering network. Digging tools were made from bison bones or sturdy wood that did not break or crack. They knew that even a shovel was part of the social and physical stability of the shelter. In some tribes, junior servant squads could lay paths between dwellings in advance, along the driest and highest areas, so that people's feet would not mix clay and bring moisture into the sleeping area. Sometimes the paths laid out on the south side could turn into long corridors for moving from warmth to warmth. These paths were not supposed to be the result of water flow disruptions. Rome thought in terms of similar squares. The Indians thought in terms of similar hills of height. This was a prototype of the camp's passive climate network, only without electricity and without the complex cynicism of coercive technology. If you can dig a canal with your hands or set a landmark for a search square, then the system burns more quietly but lasts longer. For the tribe's nobility, it was not only light, thermal mass, and rations that could be repaired tomorrow that were important, but also the routes of wind pressure. The entrance was always located on the leeward side so that the rain would not throw moisture into the room. They intuitively read the windrows of their area and understood the future environment of the reassembled camp. They never set up camp in a dry riverbed, because a dry riverbed is only a temporary illusion of peace. Where there is no water today, there may be water tomorrow faster than you can throw in firewood or close the shutters. Their knowledge of history and climate meant that the place aged gracefully and required only cosmetic drainage repairs. But the house had to be above the water and rumors. Families and elders participated in the discussion of choosing parking spaces because one wrongly chosen site could become a problem for everyone. Their strategy did not include numbered lists, but it did include lists of people by observation roles. The grass was not pulled up at the dwelling site, but trampled down, leaving an air pocket for natural drainage. Skins were laid on top of it for a soft accumulator of heat and dryness, so that the night would not argue and the morning would recharge. The skins became a second layer of the world that works without loud technology. They understood the night as not a rest, but a phase that you fix in the morning and start in the afternoon. Heat radiation and correctly reading rain and wind flows helped them survive in the harsh world of stone and time, where there was sun during the day and a fire at night. But the fire was inside the function of the stone. Any extra calorie had to go into heat, not chaos. Yes, their methods may have seemed simple, but simplicity was often more accurate than modern airtightness, where moisture is sealed in rather than removed. For them, the free energy of the sun and knowledge of the landscape were their primary technology for cooperating with nature. A house was not supposed to be a box. It was supposed to be a fortress with a door for the future use of air and steam. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion. Can we bring back this simple, honest, and modular approach to working with nature in our cities? The secret passed down from generation to generation is that these structures are not just huts, but perfect aerodynamic machines. We are used to seeing them as primitive cones, but in fact they are complex engineering structures. The main enemy inside the dwelling was not the rain itself, but condensation and smoke, which refused to escape in wet weather. Smoke vents, movable parts of the roof at the top of the cone, were an ingenious solution. These valves were controlled by long poles from the outside, allowing for fine adjustment of the draft and closing the opening to keep out rain. Residents could turn them with the wind, creating a chimney effect even in complete calm. No modern tent has such an effective ventilation and protection system at the same time. This made it possible to light a fire inside even in the heaviest downpour without fear of suffocating from smoke. But the most amazing invention was the inner lining, called dew cloth or ozan. It was a piece of leather stretched inside the dwelling at human height along the walls. It created an air gap between the cold outer covering and the living space. This house within a house solved several critical survival problems at once. First, this lining created a powerful draft, sucking cold air from below and expelling smoke upward. Second, and most importantly, it protected people from drops that could seep through the seams or condense on the walls. Water flowing down the inside of the outer tire drained into the ground outside the living area. Inside, it always remained dry, warm, and importantly, draft-free. The cone shape itself was ideal for draining water, preventing it from accumulating on the surface. Droplets rolled down at tremendous speed, not having time to soak through the cover material. The tight tension of the skin was critically important. A sagging wall would inevitably start to leak. Therefore, the tension was constantly monitored, with pegs being hammered in as the skin got wet and stretched. The seams on the tire were sewn in a special way so that water could not seep into the needle holes. Tendons were used, which swelled when wet and tightly sealed any gaps. It was a self-sealing mechanism created by nature itself. No modern glue or sealant has such adaptive properties. The entrance was made oval and raised above the ground, creating a high threshold. This prevented water from flowing in from the street and kept the lower part of the dwelling warm. The door was a tightly stretched skin on a frame that fit snugly against the opening. Often, several layers of doors were used to create an airlock. The poles that supported the entire structure also served as drains. Water entering the upper opening flowed down the smooth poles, bypassing the center of the dwelling. To prevent drops from falling from the poles into the living area, special drip ropes were used. The water obediently ran along them to the right place, where it was collected or drained. Thus, the dwelling was an active protection system that required constant management and adjustment. It was not a passive shelter where one could simply hide and forget about the outside world. It lived with people, responding to every change in the weather. It was this interactivity that made it so reliable. Like this, if you are also impressed by the sophistication of this ancient architecture. Are you ready for the shocking truth that the best membrane fabric was invented thousands of years ago? Modern tourists pride themselves on the waterproofing properties of their jackets. But leather treated using Native American methods was superior to any synthetic material. The secret lay in a unique tanning process that transformed the hide into a material that was impervious to moisture. It was true Stone Age chemistry, the results of which are still impressive today. The key step was smoking the tanned leather over rotten wood, which produced thick, cold smoke. The smoke contained formaldehyde, which penetrated deep into the structure of the fibers, preserving them and making them resistant to decay. After such treatment, the leather acquired not only a pleasant golden color, but also the ability to repel water. The fibers did not stick together when wet, and the leather remained soft even after drying. The second level of protection was the use of natural fats and oils, which were used to impregnate clothing and footwear. A mixture of animal brains, liver, and certain plant components was rubbed into the material for hours. This created a hydrophobic barrier from which water rolled off like from a goose feather. Such impregnation required regular renewal, but it worked flawlessly. Clothing made from such leather had the amazing ability to breathe, allowing vapor from the body to escape. Unlike rubber raincoats in which a person sweats and gets wet from the inside, a leather shirt maintained an ideal microclimate. This was critically important, as sweating in the cold was as dangerous as getting wet in the rain. Humidity was regulated in both directions. For particularly wet conditions, there were special capes made of rawhide, which was coarser and stiffer. They acted as a hard shell, allowing water to run off without touching the lower layers of clothing. Such raincoats were heavy, but provided 100% protection during downpours. They were worn only in cases of extreme necessity and were saved for long journeys. Footwear, moccasins, also had its own waterproofing secrets for different seasons. For wet weather, they made shoes with high tops, the seams of which were carefully coated with a mixture of resin and fat. Dry grass or moss was placed inside to absorb condensation and create an air cushion. This allowed the feet to stay warm, even if the leather on top got wet. The Indians knew that clothing could never be completely waterproof, so they relied on it drying quickly. Smoked suede dried by the fire many times faster than wool or untreated leather. If the clothing did get wet, it could be quickly restored without fear of it becoming stiff and brittle. This property was valued more highly than absolute waterproofing. The seams on clothing were often decorated with fringe, not for beauty, but for purely practical purposes. The fringe served as a water drain. Raindrops ran down the straps and fell to the ground without lingering on the main surface. This ingenious solution allowed clothing to dry right on the person while they were moving. Physics worked to protect against moisture. Caring for clothing was a daily ritual that was essential for survival during the rainy season. Constant smoking, greasing, and kneading of the leather were part of the evening routine. Each person was their own technician, responsible for the serviceability of their equipment. In the next chapter, you will learn how they managed to keep the fire going when all the wood in the forest was soaked through with water. Are you ready to learn the truth about why the word camp for the Plains Indians did not mean rest, but constant control over moisture, wind, and heat? In conditions of endless rain and wet forests, building and maintaining a fire truly became an art that was more important than any decoration of the tent or view of the horizon. Each stop did not begin with romance, but with checking the ground, where it was necessary to work through material and time, not luck. For the Romans, it was squares. For the Indians, it was heights, sun, and wind. But fire also became a continuation of order that could not be lost. Fire was always considered the heart of the camp, like a center around which life, tasks, and the movement of people revolved. It warmed everyone and everything around, not only the air, but also the ceilings of wood and stone, if stones were nearby. The Legion thought in terms of resources, the Indians thought in terms of drainage and warmth. It was an architecture of body protection, done quietly but consistently. To lose the fire meant to lose the rhythm of survival and food for the walls and the human body. Therefore, the fire was always kept going, even when the rain tried to compete with the heat. Experienced Indians knew that the most powerful source of heat was not outside the fireplace, but in the mass of what it heated. Fallen tree trunks were not just forest debris, they were huge, dense reserves of dry fuel inside. If you tapped a log and split it in the right place, the core often remained dry and ready for fire, even if the outer layer was wet. They looked for such logs in advance because they knew that if they had to decide in the moment could lose to physics. For them, knowledge is not a list, it is practice and a hand tool for selection. Splitting logs was accompanied by a strategy of carefully moving the found cores to a place where they would dry the air, and the air would dry them until the next fire. Sometimes groups of servants could use axes, wedges, and simple tools made of iron or hard wood. Each sound of the wedge was part of their work rhythm. The wood was always set aside so that the wind would help it dry further rather than stagnate. Dry material is their silent document of victory over moisture, repeated day after day, season after season. Fuel harvesting teams sometimes moved along the edge of the forest, where the tree canopy could be considered a second roof against rain and a third wall against the wind. The lower branches of conifers were especially desirable for the fire. The needles get wet on top, but the dry wood underneath is hidden from direct drops and can flare up immediately if the heat is high. They often checked the bark with their hands to understand the density of dryness for the future fire. It was quiet, simple, and understandable. Wood was also part of their budget. Saving the best fuel meant feeding the future fire. They used tinder to light the fire, which they carried close to their bodies because it is always drier close to the body than close to the ground. The bags could contain dry moss, rotten wood, and fluff from local plants. The family's tinder supplies were a valuable commodity that they did not trust anyone with without supervision. Fire demanded respect, but respect was expressed not in words, but in the preservation of what could burn. Sometimes it was the tinder that became the first bridge of warmth between man, the forest, and the future camp, which must not be interrupted. In this, the Romans and the Indians were alike. The role is important, but the material is more important than the role. Sometimes fire was carried from camp to camp in vessels with coals. This is not a fairy tale legend, but common practice for tribes that spent long periods on the move. The warm core of the fire was carried in horns, clay pots, pieces of bark, and coals to start the next cycle faster than the next wave of rain would come. This was important because rekindling the fire on damp ground would have taken too much effort. Transporting the coals was a form of patient engineering logistics that all members of the column trusted. For them, even the march was quieter than the falling rain. The structure of the bonfire during the rainy season resembled a small architectural castle. The wood was stacked in the shape of tents so that water would roll off the outer layer without flooding the core of the heat source. Inside the shelters, warm air circulated, drying the wood until it caught fire. The fire started not because it had to, but because it would work. Medieval craftsmen of the past did not like lists for destruction. Native Americans did not like to set up camp in lowlands. Cement did not like bricks. Bricks liked air. Air liked bricks. Bricks liked the cycle of fire. The heat from the hearths was distributed not only upwards through the castle or tipi, but also to the sleeping areas, where the most important people of the tribe slept to dry their spirits and bodies. Often, in the kitchen or near the hearth, an area could be set up for servants or entire groups of people to sleep. Because human warmth is also a resource. The more people there were around, the warmer their microclimate was on the cold ground, without disturbing the entrance to the clouds and the change in wind pressure. Their world was about the distribution of heat from materials, not about breaking with ideas. Sometimes canopies made of bark, skins, or other materials were built over the fire, high enough not to interfere with the smoke and direct raindrops. This canopy was a temporary but important element of control. It saved the initial heat from excess water. Medieval buildings could retain moisture without collapsing, and Native American teepees could withstand rain without losing their function, as long as people maintained the secondary energy and preserved the layer of air that retained heat. There was no magic here, just the physics of respect for the layer. Coal was more important than open flames for the Roman budget in the Middle Ages and future campaigns. Coal dries more gently, but longer. At night, logs were often sprinkled with ash so that the stone under the hearth and the wood inside the cycle could come to life in the morning without slow reignition. Fanning the coals in the morning was the unspoken start of a new cycle of comfort that should not be interrupted for weeks. They knew that one action leads to another, as long as the foundation is under control. Control is their rule of protection. The stones near the hearth were indeed heated by the sun during the day, and by the fire in the evening and morning. The heated stones could be left nearby or used locally to heat water, warm sleeping areas, or dry collected items and leather. It was their version of engineered heat distribution. Today we use appliances. They used stone and time. Stone and time respected the power of wind and fire. Wind protection and fire were close to the nail-free castle. The questors of Rome knew how to count trophies. The scribes of Victoria knew how to count visits. The scribes of the Middle Ages knew how to count stones, and the Indians knew how to count soil and wind. Their knowledge was absorbed during childhood by reading the landscape, passed down from elders to juniors, and remained their passive technology for survival against the northern darkness. The longer they looked south, the longer the wall stayed warm. The longer the wall stayed warm, the less often they asked for a new fire. They always put more attention into the beginning, so they'd be less afraid of the end of the wall and the person. Now be honest, can we learn again to set up camp and build walls so that fire and wind work for the structure? not against it, because tomorrow will also bring rain and the need for expertise in choosing the right location and materials. Guess what happened next when the temperature dropped and the rain continued to pour? The Indians used a complex system of clothing layers that allowed the body to adapt to any activity. They did not try to put everything on at once, but combined items to avoid overheating and subsequent hypothermia. The main rule was, it's better to be a little cold than to sweat. The base layer was a light leather shirt that protected the skin and absorbed a minimum of moisture. Thicker clothing was worn over it, creating air pockets that retained heat. If it got hot while working, the outer layers were immediately removed and stored in a dry place. This constant adjustment was the key to comfort. Interestingly, during heavy rain, if it was not cold, they preferred to remove excess clothing, leaving a minimum. It is much easier and faster to wipe and dry the skin by the fire than to dry a wet suede jacket. This solution, which seems paradoxical to us, saved their clothes from getting wet, keeping them dry for the evening. A naked body smeared with fat repelled water perfectly. Bison skin blankets were only used when sitting or sleeping. They were too heavy to carry and quickly became soaked, making them impossible to lift. Instead, light capes were used, which did not restrict movement. Wool blankets, which appeared later with trade, were valued for keeping people warm even when wet. Particular attention was paid to protecting the lower back and chest, which are vital centers of heat. Wide belts and breastplates served as additional insulation. Sleeves were often removable or simply tied to clothing, allowing for ventilation under the arms. The design of the clothing was modular. Leggings, separate trouser legs attached to the belt, were an ingenious invention for walking in wet grass. If the bottom got wet, it could be easily removed and dried without taking off the rest of the clothing. The thighs remained covered by a loincloth and a long shirt. This provided both mobility and protection. Hoods or wide-brimmed hats made of leather or woven material were worn on the head if the tribe's culture allowed it. Protecting the head from getting wet was important to prevent water from running down the back of the neck. Often, a simple piece of leather was thrown over the shoulders and head. Clothes were not stored on the floor, but hung under the dome of the dwelling, where warm air collected. In the morning, people would put on warm clothes that had been dried overnight. This gave them energy for the whole day. Wet clothes were never worn on bare skin if it could be avoided. Layers were changed quickly so as not to lose the accumulated heat. Discipline in the handling of clothing was ironclad. In the next chapter, you will learn how they dried hundreds of kilograms of meat and other items in conditions of 100% humidity. What if I told you that the structure of a house could be stronger than the structure of war? Life in a wet world required impeccable and repeatable organization of space, where each area had a purpose, and that purpose served longer than the vagaries of the climate. Inside the tents of a camp or in the houses of the late Middle Ages, fire was a point of reference but not a point of chaos. People knew that it was not only important to light a fire, but also to ensure that it heated the material around it. If stone or wood absorbed heat, it would later give it back, and that return was survival time. It was a rule without formulas, but with the precision of daily experience. Chimneys, roofs, window shutters, everything was designed so that the elements would not linger in the main rooms. They understood draft, pressure, steam, and heat without using fancy words. It was an education rooted in craft and generations. Like the Romans, who divided the battlefield into sectors and tasks, the medieval camp divided heat and moisture into directions. For them, physics was an ally if given a chance. But now to the point, you need to increase the text sent to you by 1.5 times, preserving the structure, simple language, historical truth, a maximum of 6 sentences per paragraph, and 24 paragraphs instead of 16. The intriguing questions at the beginning and end remain unchanged. All other content is expanded truthfully, logically, and simply. Here is the expanded text. Are you ready to learn the truth about how Native Americans and medieval craftsmen controlled the indoor climate of their homes? Living in the rain taught discipline, but this discipline was not about suppressing emotions, but about preserving the function of things, people, and warmth. Their dwellings were permeable to air, but impervious to chaos. They did not lock in moisture, but removed it when possible and retained heat when necessary. In this, they were closer to physics than to romance. The kitchen in a late medieval estate could be not only a place for cooking, but also a place for maintaining the life of the building in winter. But we are interested in those who lived, relying on the landscape and steam, not on the beast of war. In the flatlands, the first to be assessed were those who could not be lost tomorrow. The wounded were saved, prisoners were assessed, stones were warmed, moisture escaped through cracks and pressure pipes. Moisture and heat worked as two inseparable storylines. But the storyline was simple. If it can be repaired, then it will be repaired. If it is repaired, then the foundation will remain alive. And their foundation was not concrete, but the distribution of the purpose and mass of the material. Inside the teepee, above the hearth, a complex multi-level drying frame was constructed. It was not a decorative structure, but part of everyday logic. Poles and wooden crossbars were placed so that hot air would constantly rise to them. Everything was dried on this frame. Moccasins, raincoats, skins for tools, bags of grain, belts, and body capes. This was done even in the middle of the wet season so that the leather would not break down from moisture. There was an unspoken rule. The dryer had to be a warm wall for things, otherwise they would become consumables. The task of monitoring the drying process was entrusted not to random people, but to those who knew what dampness meant for the material. Most often, these were women, craftsmen, assistants, and the most experienced guardians of the hearth at home. They understood drying time better than hunting time. It was a budget measured not by hours on a device, but by hours in the forest and at home. Women and servants made sure that each item was turned over on time. On time, but quietly, without unnecessary words. This is how they struck a balance between the durability of the leather and the durability of the drying ritual. Things had to be turned over constantly so that they would not dry out or remain damp. The horn makers and scroll makers already understood this, but in the Middle Ages, even entertaining guests could be part of the drying of the social network. These were the rules of inertia and control. Control was unspoken but regular. Without regularity, any system began to smell of chaos. And chaos is the loss of status and durability of the material. Windows in late medieval houses may have been small on the outside, but on the inside they had wide slopes. This reflected their understanding of the path of energy. Wide slopes directed sunlight deep into the room. The rays warmed the wood of the opening and the stone around the frame. Even in winter, this allowed the room to stay warm longer after the day's heating. Heating was considered consistent and long-lasting. A lady could make a dozen visits, and a wall could warm up over a dozen nights. Day and night were like accounting for heat for them. The shutters were made of thick wood and closed every evening. It was a rule of protection that was not discussed aloud. The internal heat of the night should not compete with the external cold. The shutters did not completely block the steam, but they did block the wind. The air pocket between the frame and the shutters protected the heat, allowing the night to stabilize the microclimate. It was a simple technology that was not affected by the temperature fluctuations between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon and dawn. Firewood and status wood were stored separately. The sleeping platforms in the teepee were raised above the ground, as were any functional surfaces that should not come into contact with the cold earth. Air circulated freely under the platforms, carrying away moisture without the need for forced pumps. This prevented dampness from seeping into the sleeping fabrics. The sleeping skins were treated with special care. During the day, they were rolled up and raised above the damp air near the floor so that they would not absorb excess moisture during the day. In the evening, the skins were spread out again, warm, soft, and ready for the night's warmth. It was a quiet ritual to close the day and open the night of dryness. They knew, the order of things is your heating without technology. But even with this regular logic, the air should not stagnate. Stagnation meant mold and rot, and they liked to remove mold and rot with the vapor permeability of the walls and pressure pipes. This air draft was their passive climate control system for people and builders. The builder and the tribe agreed the main thing was not to remove the wind, but to give it a way out where it was not an enemy. Hunger was worse than rain, and moisture was the main enemy of food supplies, capable of destroying them with mold in a couple of days. The main survival food was pemmican, a concentrate of dried meat, fat, and berries. Its secret lay not only in its composition, but also in the way it was stored. The fat enveloping the meat particles served as an ideal preservative, preventing moisture from penetrating. Pemmican was packed in parfleche, special envelopes made of rawhide. Parfleche was as hard as a suitcase, and its flaps closed tightly, blocking access to air and water. The seams were often filled with fat or resin to ensure complete airtightness. Such packages could lie in a puddle, and the contents would remain dry. Meat that had not yet been processed was dried on the same frames under the ceiling of the dwelling. The smoke from the hearth not only dried the product, but also smoked it, killing bacteria and repelling insects. This made it possible to prepare food even in wet weather, when drying in the sun was impossible. Grain nuts and dried roots were stored in storage pits dug into the ground. The walls of such pits were lined with grass and skins, and sealed with clay and turf on top. A properly made pit was a dry and cool refrigerator where rainwater could not penetrate. The Indians tried not to store large quantities of raw meat during rainy weather, preferring to cook or process it immediately. Cooked meat kept longer than raw meat and was safer. Broth was an excellent way to warm up and get nutrients. Bone marrow and fat were stored in animal bladders or intestines tied with a knot. This was completely airtight natural packaging. Fat was a source of enormous energy, necessary for warming the body in the cold. Its consumption increased sharply during the rainy season. Tableware for eating and storage was made of wood, horn, or thick leather. Ceramics were used less often because they were fragile and porous. Wooden bowls were carefully washed and dried to prevent rot. If food did start to spoil, it was immediately separated from the rest and fed to dogs or thrown away. The risk of poisoning was too great. Supplies were checked regularly. The ability to keep food dry was as important as the ability to obtain it. The loss of winter supplies due to dampness meant starvation for the entire tribe. This food security system was a reliable insurance against the vagaries of the weather. It allowed people not to depend on luck in hunting every day. Sometimes circumstances forced them to leave their camp and move through a wall of rain. Moving camp in such weather was a complex logistical operation. The main task was to keep the covers of the dwellings and sleeping skins dry during transport. They were folded in a special way, with the fur or dry side inside and tightly tied with straps. Horses or dogs pulled sleds, travois, to which the cargo was attached. To prevent the items from dragging through the mud and water, the sled platform was made as high as possible. The cargo was covered with thick pieces of rawhide, forming a protective cocoon. Water ran off this cover without penetrating the bales. The people themselves were as focused as possible during the journey. Stops were made infrequently so as not to cool down and get things wet during unloading. They walked quickly, one after another, conserving their strength. Scouts looked for the most solid paths, avoiding swampy lowlands. To cross the swollen rivers, they used bullboats, round frames covered with a single bison hide. These were surprisingly stable and load-bearing vessels. They carried the most valuable cargo, children, the elderly, and dry clothes, while the ferrymen pushed them across. The seams of the boats were coated with fat to make them watertight. Tools and weapons, bows, knives, guns, required special protection during the journey. They were kept in leather cases with long flaps, thickly coated with grease. The bowstring, made of tendons, would stretch and become useless when wet, so it was always removed and hidden under clothing. Upon arriving at a new location, the first thing they did was set up their dwellings, working at incredible speed. First, they created a dry space, and only then did they bring their belongings inside. This prevented bedding and clothing from getting wet during unpacking. If it was impossible to build a large fire, they used small portable stoves or simply ate cold pemmican. The main thing was to get shelter from the wind and water. Comfort was restored later when the camp was set up. Horses at the campsite were sheltered in natural shelters such as ravines or groves. Caring for the animals was important, as without them, the tribe would lose its mobility. Their backs were rubbed with grass to warm and dry them after the journey. Marches in the rain were extreme, but the Indians were prepared for them. It was a test of endurance and organization, which they passed with honor. Each such march was a small victory over the elements, proving that man cannot be confined to one place, even by a wall of water. Comparing the Indians' way of life with modern technology, we see something striking. Their system was more sustainable. Modern membranes become clogged with dirt over time, impregnations wash out, and synthetics melt in the fire. Leather, fat, and smoke are renewable resources that were always at hand. Their equipment could be repaired in the field, while ours often cannot. They won not because of super materials, but because of a systematic approach. It was a combination of the right place, the right architecture, clothing, and, most importantly, the right behavior. They did not rely on a single magic pill, but used a set of measures. If one element of protection failed, others provided backup. Modern people often try to isolate themselves from the environment, to create an airtight spacesuit. The Indians, on the other hand, worked with the environment, allowing their bodies and dwellings to breathe. This principle of permeability and ventilation proved to be more viable in the long run. Moisture must have a way out, otherwise it will kill from within. Their endurance also played a role. Bodies hardened by a constant life in nature coped better with temperature changes. They were not as afraid of the cold as we are, and they knew the limits of their capabilities. This knowledge was worth more than any jacket. We can learn from them not only about technology, but also about how to deal with difficulties. Calmness, planning, and attention to detail are the universal keys to survival. Rain is just water, and it is up to us whether it becomes a source of life or a cause of death. The history of indigenous peoples teaches us that comfort is not the absence of problems, but the ability to solve them. Staying dry means thinking ahead and acting precisely. It is an art honed by centuries of trial and error. Their experience is not just a museum exhibit, but a working guide to adaptation. In a world where the climate is becoming increasingly unpredictable, this ancient knowledge may once again become relevant. Nature does not change, only our tools do. Today, we admire their wisdom, realizing how complex and thoughtful their simple life was. It was a triumph of the human mind over the harsh conditions of the wild. We, the people of technology, often lose to them in our basic understanding of the physics of the world. Maybe it's time to take another look at how those who called this land home lived. They stayed dry not because they had secret spells, but because they were pros at living on Earth. We have seen that rain protection for the indigenous peoples of North America was not a set of disparate techniques, but a holistic philosophy of life. From choosing a place to camp to sewing moccasins, everything was subordinated to a single goal: staying warm and healthy. They turned their dwellings, clothing, and daily life into a single mechanism capable of withstanding weeks of inclement weather. Their example shows that knowledge and skills are more important than even the most expensive equipment. Which of these ancient survival methods do you think can be applied to modern tourism? Share your ideas in the comments, suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel, and don't forget to subscribe.